Hello, BookTube. I don't go to the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston as often as I used to. There have been times in my life where I went every single day. Uh, Sometimes because I was working nearby, other times because I had sick dogs at home, and if I knew that I needed a little time to mentally recuperate myself. But recently, uh, my attendance has fallen off. But I did go today, and I brought a huge bag of books to turn in for credit, and was kind of thinking in the back of my mind, okay, well, the healthy way for this to happen would be that you bring this huge, heavy sack of books to the store, and you leave that much lighter. But that didn't happen, as I'm sure a lot of you know. I brought a huge, heavy bag of books. I got credit, and I left with a huge, heavy bag of different books. And I wanted to show them to you, because some of them might be of interest to you. The first one was a hardcover of something I once had in a ratty little paperback, and even the paperback is gone. So I'm very happy to have it again. It's The Good Word and Other Words by Wilfred Sheed, who was a novelist. His novel Max Jameson and his novel People Will Always Be Kind, I think, are much better than critics have tended to think in subsequent decades. And also, he was also a bit of a public intellectual who wrote this is occasional pieces of nonfiction that don't collect anything like all that he wrote. He was a prolific book reviewer in his younger days. He stayed in the craft right to the end. And one of the pieces collected in here is called The Art of Reviewing, in which he talks about the effect of book reviewing on authors. I thought I'd read you a bit of it because it's so good. I reread it on the way back and was just smiling from ear to ear. Older authors who've been through before and collected their tin stars and stuffed pandas know how little most praise and blame actually mean. If properly arrogant, they marvel at these young puppies. And in parentheses he writes, teaches English where? Who presume to tell them their craft and only fret about the possible effect on sales. Their heads are too old and stiff to be turned by praise or bent by grief. If they could cash reviews at a pawn shop, they'd be down in the morning with a sack full of the best. Young authors, though, may be taken in by the trumped-up noise and glare, and reviewers for the only time may actually have a chance to influence them a little. Hence, more precision is called for. Overpraise can lead to bad habits, some of them incurable. Trying to repeat that thing you did so marvelously. Blame hurts and confuses. A talented beginner must wonder if he can do anything right and whether it's worth going on at all. Owing to some garish pre-trial publicity, largely of his own making, but when does literature care about that, he was set upon by an elder not as an elder and not as a first novelist. His novel was read for the most part without care or sympathy and consigned to the pit. A writer with a large advance is assumed to be able to take it. And there's a bunch of other stuff in here, but of course the irony of them reprinting The Art of the Review is that we will, as far as I know, never have a collected book reviews of Wilfred Sheed, and that's a terrible shame because he could really turn a phrase. But I went to the Brattle. You don't ever want to push the fates at the Brattle. The Brattle Bookshop, for those of you who don't know, is a used bookstore here in Boston, and it has a lot next door to the shop proper that has carts on wheels. The whole lot is full of sale carts, $1, $3, and $5 books. I mainly do my hunting out there in the cart section, and it's totally random. It's not organized in any way, and it's refreshed all the time, every day. And you don't want to push the fates. You don't know what you're going to find there. You don't ever want to go to the sale carts looking for one particular thing. Not only will you not find it, but you won't find anything. But nevertheless, because I hadn't been in a while, I was thinking, I'm in the mood for big, fat biographies. That's what I'd like. I'd like to find a bunch of big, fat biographies out in the sale lot. And that partially happened, but then the sale lot had a mind of its own as well. I did find two biographies, and they both pleased me greatly. The first one is King George VI by John Wheeler Bennett. This is the official authorized biography of the king by Wheeler Bennett, who was given unrestricted access to the archives at Buckingham Palace and Windsor, and whose finished product was mocked by a lot of reviewers as being this sanitized, David Carradine called it a sarcophagus, that had no pointed edges or whatever. And we've mentioned on this channel before, not that I expect you to remember, because it's 8,000 videos, but I've mentioned on this channel before that I have a weird sweet tooth for authorized official biographies, be it royalty or anybody else. I always think it's a little bit brattish and a little bit willfully obtuse for readers out in the penny press to knock these things for being sanitized and soft-edged, because of course that is what an authorized biography is. No matter how many times the subject of such a biography says, no, I told him, do whatever you like, I don't care. No matter how many times any subject says that, they don't mean it. And neither do their heirs. They never actually mean it. At the beginning of authorized biographies, from time immemorial, you will have the biographer say, the keepers of the papers and the archives said no restrictions on you whatsoever. But it's not true. Even you've got these people who hold your next paycheck beaming over your shoulder. You're going to mind your P's and Q's, and Wheeler Bennett does. But he's a fantastic prose stylist, just a fantastic prose stylist, and so I will read anything that he writes. And this. It had a brief paperback run, and I had the paperback, God knows how many years ago, long since fallen apart or disappeared. So when I saw this, I did a mental count of which George VI biographies I have, and I only have one. So now I have two, including, now I have the authorized one. And it's going to be a joy to reread. I haven't read this in probably 30 years. So, and the other big biography that I read is much newer, and it's not royalty. It's Norian by Diane Solway, a big fat biography of the great Russian ballet star. I just read a new little book on ballet and was profoundly uninterested in the subject. And yet I loved this book. I don't remember if I gave it full credit in the Donahue Interregnum as being one of the great biographies of its year, but it was terrific. It's a terrific book. I'm going to love rereading it. About a tremendously complex and contradictory guy. But the main thing I remember loving about this book wasn't its treatment of Nureyev, who, is a fairly simple figure. I don't think he was even technically conscious in the way that we characterize human beings. But the thing that I remember loving about it wasn't so much its treatment of him as it was this author has an amazing ability to bring supporting characters to life. So I put this on the roster to reread soon. But then the big fat biography thing went off the rails. And another theme emerged. Ancient Rome. I love me some books on ancient Rome. And I found two that don't have dust jackets, which ordinarily bother me, but you'd be hard-pressed to find these with dust jackets. And the first is they're both tomes. The first one is fairly modern. It's a new edition of the Cambridge Ancient History, and this is the volume on the Roman Republic, which goes from the Gracchi, who were two signature Roman rabble-rousers, all the way to the fall of the Republic. So this is the high noon of the Roman Republic before a series of military dictators turned it into an autocracy, turned it into a dictatorship. And it's a fraught period in Roman history for me. I'm always usually annoyed by the way it's characterized by historians. Historians constantly love to use just a shorthand of saying that the Republic was doomed, that it was tottering, that it couldn't handle the burdens of an expanding empire, that it couldn't handle its own internal politics, that it couldn't handle regional demands for citizenship and citizens' rights. None of that is true. The Roman Republic was extremely strong. It could have lasted a long time. The one thing it didn't take into account is that it would face a series of its own citizens wanting to destroy it. No republic can survive that. Enough said. But the Cambridge Ancient History, these huge, stodgy-looking volumes that are under strict editorial control of usually one editor or a small team of editors, and they take a period and they parcel it up into peoples, literatures, architecture, wars, and either write those essays themselves, those self-contained essays themselves, or farm them out to other leading historians. The result being that these things they're drastically uneven as reading experience. They're not meant to read the Cambridge Ancient History, the Roman Republic, from beginning to end. You're not meant to do that. I will certainly do that, but you're not meant to. You're meant to go to see, well, okay, what about voting rights? What about farming systems? Whatever interests you. When I was researching the Roman historical novel that I wrote, Optimus, about the Roman Emperor Trajan, the Cambridge Ancient History was just invaluable. And they come in successive waves of revision. This is a newer version. And they have wonderful fold-out maps all throughout, tons and tons of ancillary details. Just they're amazing to have. I can't ever recommend them because they're not narrative histories. But I still love them myself. And this is the volume that I would want above them all. So I was glad to find it for virtually nothing. And then I found another ancient Rome book, much older. This is from the very beginning of the 20th century, in 1901, I think. It's The House of Caesar by Seymour Van Sandvoort. And it is a lovely, fully illustrated book about the Caesars and Van Sandvoort's theory that it was a house infected with a disease of murder, that it was a uniquely homicidal house. And he locates the source of much of that disease in Livia, the wife of Augustus Caesar. And if that strikes a familiar chord with some of you, you're not wrong. And that idea was taken up and run right to the goalpost by Robert Graves in I, Claudius. And it has its genesis here. I have not read all of this book. I've read chunks of it, but I haven't read the whole thing, and I've never owned it. And I can't wait to just sink in and read it. Van Sandvoort's writing, he calls it a collection of observations. He doesn't call it a history, and he doesn't cite his sources. He just says, I've studied the original sources, Tacitus, Livy, Suetonius, all that sort of thing, same as anybody, and all the modern sources, Gibbon and whatnot. And I'm just giving you an account of my own, a sort of a talk through of my own of the house of the Julio-Claudians. And I think that's fascinating. I can't wait to dig in and see what he has to say. He has a very brief preface that it's just 2 pages that I thought was adorable because he was a bit of a poobah, a minor poobah. He was a very wealthy man from a very wealthy family, and he was a lawyer and he was a civil servant, and he had a sort of a slab face. But when he was a younger man, when he was in his late 30s, he went to Italy with his mother, who was Elizabeth Van Schacht. Was an amazing woman, an amazing woman. If only it hadn't been for the Victorian corseting of her upbringing, she would have felt herself capable of writing books like this herself and would have done a better job than her son did. And I think he knew that. And but he traveled with her. And how I wish, he may, for all I know, have written an account of their travels together. If so, I've never heard of it. I would certainly love to find it. And the Brattle Bookshop is one of the only places I will find it unless I go deep into the bowels of, book collecting, which I'm not going to do. Things like this turn up at the Brattle Bookshop, which is why I love the place so much. But he talks in his preface about preparing this book. I was keeping in mind, this is 1901. This is full of illustrations, but there was no internet database. There were no pictures to take on JPEGs offline. You had to arrange for your own illustrations in your book, and it could sometimes be grueling. And he gives an anecdote at the end here where he talks about wandering around Italy with his mother. He says, among the imperishable memories which lighten the soberer vistas of the past are those of the happy days when, in supplementing her earlier work, together we sallied forth in the eternal city, and by pleading, cajolery, and insistence, with here and there, it must be confessed, a somewhat lavish use of lire, secured the necessary permesso for our lively little photographic Tito to make a negative of some rare bust which presumably had never before faced the camera. Instant dismissal would be mine, Signore Americano, if it came to his holiness's ears that this had been permitted, said the smiling official as he slyly pocketed the gold piece, which was the price of the coveted photograph of Agrippina Major, secured from the Charminote Holy Lent itself. And that was written in November of 1901, and it hints at adventures that I wish existed in a book. I confess, I would read that book before I would read this one if I had them both in front of me, but I'm going to love reading this. So that was kind of a Brattle haul. It had 2 ancient Roman books, neither one's with dust jackets. And then I had two big biographies. Nureyev and the king who led England through World War II. And then The Good Word and Other Words by Wilfred Sheed, which will go right in this room up on, there's a shelf over there for Bellatra. There's a shelf over there for essays, collected reviews, collected writings of nonfiction, stuff like that. The shelf of my own profession. Only people much, much better at it than I am. And that's it. That is a quick Brattle haul for you, just in case it's of interest. And I'll wrap this up now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.